The city was alive with lights and movement, but for him, everything felt strangely quiet. Sitting alone in his office, high above the streets, the CEO looked out through the wide glass windows at the world below. Cars moved like streams of light, people hurried through crosswalks, and somewhere far away, a child was probably laughing. But none of that laughter reached him. His office was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall, each second reminding him that another day had passed. Another day filled with meetings, phone calls, and business deals. Another day where he had achieved so much in the eyes of others, but deep inside, he felt he had achieved nothing at all. His name was known by thousands. People in his company admired him, and newspapers often wrote about his success. He was called a visionary, a leader, and sometimes even a genius. But titles and praise had stopped giving him happiness long ago. The truth he carried quietly was simple: he was lonely. No one would have guessed that a man who had everything, luxury, wealth, respect, could feel so empty. Yet every night, when the world around him celebrated him, he went home to an apartment that echoed with silence. He thought about how he had reached this point. When he was younger, he dreamed of success, of building something great, of proving himself. He worked harder than anyone else, spending countless nights in the office, sleeping at his desk, eating meals in a hurry, and giving up time with friends and family. At first, it felt worth it. He was achieving things others only dreamed of. The company grew, money flowed, people respected him. But somewhere in that journey, something else had quietly slipped away. He remembered the birthdays he had missed, the dinners with his family he had promised but never attended, and the times his phone had rung with calls from loved ones that he ignored because he was too busy. At the time, he told himself he was doing it all for them, for a better future. But now, as he looked around his large, expensive office filled with awards and trophies, he couldn't find comfort in any of it. The awards did not smile at him. The trophies did not ask how his day was. The walls did not give him warmth. That evening, after finishing a long meeting, he decided to walk instead of calling his driver. He stepped out into the cool night air, leaving behind the glass towers and neon lights. He walked without purpose, hands in his pockets, his mind heavy with thoughts. The streets were full of people, but he felt invisible among them. Parents held the hands of their children, couples laughed together, friends shared stories as they walked. He noticed how connected everyone seemed, how alive they looked compared to him. He realized that he had everything money could buy but lacked the one thing every child on the street seemed to have: simple joy. His steps carried him toward a quiet park, a small green space tucked between tall buildings. It was late enough that the park wasn't crowded. A few benches stood empty, and trees swayed softly in the evening breeze. He chose a bench near a lamp post and sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. He lowered his head and closed his eyes for a moment. For once, there were no assistants rushing to him with papers, no phones ringing, no board members asking for decisions. Just silence, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the faint laughter of a child in the distance. He sat there, lost in his own thoughts. He wondered if this was what his life would always feel like: successful on the outside but hollow within. He wondered when he had last laughed freely, without worrying about responsibilities or deals. He could not even remember. His wealth had given him comfort, but it had stolen his peace. His position had given him power, but it had taken away his time. And now, sitting in the park with no one recognizing him in his simple clothes, he felt strangely small, like a man who had run too far in the wrong direction. As he sat there, he noticed a little girl playing a few feet away. She was holding a teddy bear, talking to it as if it were alive, spinning around with childlike energy. Her laughter was soft, but it reached him, cutting through the silence he had wrapped himself in. He watched her for a while, and something stirred inside him. It had been years since he had taken the time to simply notice a child's laughter. He used to know that sound well, once upon a time, when his own daughter was small. But now, those memories felt distant, like a dream he could barely hold on to. He sighed, lowering his head again, not wanting to think about the family moments he had lost. He didn't notice that the little girl had stopped playing and was looking at him. She tilted her head, watching the way he sat quietly, his shoulders heavy, his face tired. Children have a way of seeing things adults often miss. They do not need explanations or stories, they just feel. And this little girl felt that the man on the bench was sad. For him, time seemed to stretch endlessly. He thought about the people who admired him and wondered if any of them truly cared about him as a person, not just as a leader or a businessman. He thought about how he had pushed away the ones who really mattered. The loneliness was heavy, and though he tried to hide it behind his success, in that moment, sitting in the park, there was no hiding. He was simply a man, tired and alone. The night deepened, but he did not get up to leave. Something about the quiet of the park felt safe. For once, he didn't have to pretend to be strong or important. He could just sit there, nameless among strangers. Yet, as peaceful as it was, the sadness in his chest would not go away. He leaned back against the bench, looking at the stars peeking between the branches of the trees, and wondered silently if life would ever feel full again. At that moment, footsteps approached. Small footsteps. He glanced sideways and saw the little girl walking toward him, holding her teddy bear tightly in her arms. She looked up at him with curious, innocent eyes. He didn't know what she wanted, and he didn't say anything. But before he could even think of words, she stretched out her tiny hands, offering him her teddy bear. Her voice was soft, simple, and honest. "You can take my teddy," she said, "you look sad." The man blinked, speechless. For a second, he didn't know what to say. The world that had seemed so heavy suddenly stopped. A child, who didn't even know who he was, had seen his sadness and offered him the only thing she had, the toy that gave her comfort. He felt his throat tighten. No assistant, no business partner, no newspaper had ever given him something so pure, so real. The man stared at the teddy bear in her small hands, unable to speak. For a moment, he wondered if he had heard her right. He had sat in boardrooms where billions were discussed, he had been praised by people who barely knew him, and he had shaken hands with some of the most powerful figures in the world. Yet never had a single sentence touched him so deeply as the one this child had spoken. Her eyes shone with sincerity, and her tiny arms reached out with the teddy bear as if it were the most precious gift she could give. He felt his chest tighten in a way he hadn't felt for years. Words seemed far away. Finally, with a trembling hand, he gently touched the teddy bear but didn't take it right away. "Why would you give me your teddy?" he asked softly, his voice rough with emotion. The girl tilted her head, her simple answer breaking through his walls. "Because you look sad. My teddy helps me when I'm sad. Maybe it will help you too." He almost laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh he gave in interviews or at corporate dinners. It was softer, real, almost fragile. He looked at her, a stranger who had no idea who he was, and felt a warmth inside that he hadn't felt in years. She wasn't asking for anything. She wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't pretending. She simply wanted to share her comfort with someone she thought needed it. Slowly, he took the teddy bear from her tiny hands. The fabric was worn out, one ear slightly bent, and its little button eyes seemed almost alive. It smelled faintly of crayons and vanilla, perhaps from the girl's home. He held it carefully, as though it were something sacred. He had signed papers worth millions without hesitation, but this felt different. He was holding the kind of innocence money could never buy. "Thank you," he whispered. His voice broke slightly, and he quickly cleared his throat, not wanting to show too much emotion. But the girl was watching him, smiling brightly, as though giving away her teddy was the easiest and most natural thing to do. She climbed up onto the bench beside him without asking permission, her legs swinging freely because they didn't reach the ground. She leaned back, hugging herself as if the missing teddy didn't matter. "Do you feel better now?" she asked. The man looked at the teddy again, then at her. "A little," he admitted. "But, doesn't this teddy mean a lot to you? Won't you miss it?" She shrugged with the kind of honesty only children had. "Sometimes, but it's okay. My daddy says we should always share. And Teddy always helps me. He can help you too." The word daddy made his heart ache. He thought of his own daughter, who had once held her own toys close and offered him cookies from her tiny plastic kitchen set. He used to sit on the floor with her, pretending to drink imaginary tea, before work pulled him away and he started saying, "Not now, maybe later." That later had stretched into years. Trying to push the ache aside, he asked the girl, "What's your name?" "Amelia," she said proudly. "What's yours?" He paused. Normally, when people asked that question, he gave his full name and watched their eyes widen in recognition. But Amelia was different. She wasn't asking with expectations. She was asking the way a child asks, just to know. "My name is David," he said simply. She nodded, satisfied. "Hi, David." There was something freeing about being just David and not Mr. CEO or Sir. For the first time in years, he felt like a regular person, sitting in a park, talking to a little girl who saw nothing but a sad man in need of kindness. They sat together quietly for a while. Amelia swung her legs, humming softly to herself. David kept holding the teddy, feeling oddly comforted by its softness. The park around them seemed calmer now, the sounds of the city fading as he focused only on this simple, unexpected moment. After a few minutes, Amelia started talking again, the way children often do when they feel comfortable. "I come here a lot with my mommy. Sometimes with my daddy too, but he's busy. He works a lot, just like you, I think. Mommy says he works hard for us, but sometimes I wish he didn't. I like it more when he plays with me." David felt a sharp pang in his chest. Her words cut deep, not because they were meant to, but because they were true. They reminded him of everything his own daughter must have felt, waiting for him to come home, waiting for him to notice her drawings, waiting for him to play. He had told himself for years that he was working for her future, but now he wondered if she would have preferred his presence over his money. "What do you like to play?" he asked, his voice soft, almost hesitant. Amelia's face lit up. "I like drawing. And I like making houses with blocks. Sometimes I make really tall towers. Daddy says they look like real buildings." She giggled, then leaned closer as if sharing a secret. "But sometimes I knock them down just because it's funny." David found himself smiling, a real smile that reached his eyes. "I used to build towers too, when I was little. Maybe not as tall as yours though." She laughed at the thought, and her laughter filled the empty spaces inside him. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about schedules, meetings, or deadlines. He was just listening to a child talk about towers and drawings. And strangely, it felt more important than anything else he had done that day. As their conversation continued, he asked her about school, her friends, and her favorite games. She answered with the honesty and enthusiasm only a child could bring. Every answer was simple, but every answer carried a truth that made him think. When she talked about waiting for her daddy, he thought about his own daughter waiting for him. When she spoke about laughing with her friends, he realized how little laughter he had in his own life. The park grew quieter as the night deepened, but for David, time no longer mattered. He felt lighter, as though the little girl's words were brushing away years of dust from his heart. Holding the teddy bear, listening to Amelia, he realized that maybe what he had been searching for wasn't success or wealth. Maybe it was this, the raw, unfiltered kindness of human connection. After a while, Amelia's mother called her from a distance. She looked up, spotting her mom waiting near the gate of the park. Amelia hopped off the bench, brushing off her little dress. "That's my mommy. I have to go now," she said cheerfully. David nodded, though a part of him wished the moment could last longer. Thank you for sharing your teddy with me, Amelia. She grinned and waved as she skipped away. Keep it. Teddy likes helping people. David looked down at the teddy in his hands, stunned. She wasn't taking it back. A child had given him her comfort, her treasure, without hesitation. He sat there, frozen, watching her run to her mother, holding her hand and walking away without a second glance, as if giving away a teddy bear was the most natural thing in the world. Alone again on the bench, David held the teddy tightly. For years, his hands had held contracts, documents, pens, and papers worth millions. Yet this simple toy, worn and small, felt heavier, more meaningful than anything else. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, realizing that something inside him had shifted. A stranger's kindness had touched him more deeply than all the praise he had ever received. The night after meeting Amelia, David went back to his apartment carrying the teddy bear carefully in his hands. He placed it on the table as if it were something fragile. The apartment was silent, the same way it always was. The walls were decorated with modern art, the shelves filled with expensive objects, but none of it made him feel at home. He sat on the couch, staring at the teddy bear, replaying Amelia's words in his mind. You can take my teddy, you look sad. The simplicity of that sentence stayed with him. It wasn't just a toy she had given him, it was a piece of her kindness, her innocence, her ability to notice what so many adults ignored. He thought about her laughter, the way her eyes sparkled when she spoke about her games, and how she had mentioned her father being too busy. Those words felt like a mirror held up to his own life. His daughter, Emma, had once been just like Amelia, bright, playful, always waiting for him. He remembered how she used to run to the door when he came home, her small arms wide open, her voice filled with joy as she called, "Daddy." For a few minutes, all the stress of his work used to melt away when he held her. But slowly, as the years passed, those moments became fewer. His daughter had stopped waiting by the door. She had stopped asking him to play. She had grown used to his absence. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, holding the teddy bear close to his chest. He realized something he had avoided admitting for years: he had been so busy building his company, chasing deals, and earning respect that he had missed the most important parts of life. Amelia's innocent words had opened a wound that he had been ignoring for too long. The next morning, his driver came as usual to pick him up. David looked at the busy streets through the car window, but his mind was somewhere else. At the office, meetings went on as usual. His staff spoke about numbers, projects, and contracts. He nodded, answered, and gave instructions, but his heart wasn't in it. He found himself distracted, thinking about Amelia and the teddy bear on his desk at home. It was strange, but her kindness seemed more important than all the presentations being made in front of him. During lunch, instead of sitting with board members or clients, he excused himself and went for a walk outside. He passed by families, children running around, people laughing together. It made him realize how rare laughter was in his own life. His employees respected him but rarely laughed with him. His friends from the past no longer called, and his family had grown distant. Somewhere along the way, he had lost the connections that made life meaningful. That evening, he called his assistant and asked her to clear his schedule for the weekend. She was surprised he never cleared his schedule. But David insisted. He wanted to spend time with his daughter. It had been too long. When he arrived at his ex-wife's home to see Emma, he felt nervous. It had been months since he had spent more than an hour with her. She was 12 now, no longer the little girl who used to wait for him by the door. When she opened it and saw him standing there, her expression was polite but not excited. She hugged him briefly, then stepped back. That small distance between them hurt him more than he expected. He tried to talk to her, asking about school, her hobbies, her friends. She answered, but her voice was flat, as if she wasn't sure what to say. She had learned not to expect too much from him, and he could feel it in every word. Sitting there, he realized just how much time he had lost, how many moments had slipped away because he was too busy working. At one point, he remembered the teddy bear Amelia had given him. He told Emma about the little girl in the park and how she had noticed his sadness. He showed her the teddy, which he had brought along. Emma looked at it curiously, then smiled faintly. "She gave you her teddy? That's really nice of her." It was the first real smile he had seen on her face that day. For a brief moment, he saw the little girl she used to be, and it gave him hope. Later that night, after he left Emma's house, David sat alone in his car and thought deeply. Amelia had unknowingly reminded him of what truly mattered. His daughter was slipping away from him, not because she wanted to, but because he had let work consume everything. If he didn't change now, one day she might not want him in her life at all. The thought terrified him. The following week at work, he began to notice things he had never paid attention to before. One of his employees looked exhausted, his eyes heavy from long nights. Another quietly skipped lunch to finish a task. A young mother on his staff rushed out early one evening to pick up her child, apologizing again and again as if being a mother was a weakness. David saw himself in all of them. He realized that in building his empire, he had created an environment where people felt trapped in the same cycle that had stolen his own happiness. He called a meeting with his senior staff. For the first time, instead of talking only about profits and goals, he spoke about balance, family, and the importance of living beyond work. His team looked surprised. Some even looked relieved, as though they had been waiting for this moment. It wasn't easy, but David knew change had to start with him. At night, he often sat with the teddy bear, remembering Amelia's words. It became more than just a toy. It was a symbol, a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could create the biggest changes. The teddy reminded him to slow down, to notice, to connect. Still, the change inside him was not simple. There were days when the weight of his old habits tried to pull him back. There were moments when he felt guilty for the time he had already lost with Emma. But each time he thought of giving up, he remembered Amelia's innocent eyes and her gentle words. If a child could notice his sadness and care enough to help, then surely he could learn to notice and care about the people in his life. Slowly, he began to rebuild his relationship with Emma. He visited more often, not with gifts or grand plans, but with his time. They went for walks, ate ice cream together, and even built a small tower out of blocks, just like Amelia had described in the park. It felt strange at first, but then natural, and he saw his daughter's smile becoming brighter each time. He realized that children didn't need perfection, they just needed presence. Meanwhile, Amelia's gift stayed with him, silently guiding him. He never saw her again in the park, but in some way, she was always with him. Her teddy sat on his desk at home, a quiet reminder that sometimes strangers could change your life with nothing more than a few simple words. The weeks turned into months, and David's life slowly began to change. The man who had once spent nearly every waking hour locked inside meeting rooms and offices began carving out time for things that truly mattered. Yet, the journey was not smooth. Habits formed over decades are not easy to break. Sometimes his old instincts returned, an urge to pick up his phone during dinner, a temptation to accept late-night meetings, or the thought that stepping away from work even for a day might mean falling behind. But every time those doubts crept in, his eyes would fall on the teddy bear sitting quietly on his desk at home. Its button eyes reminded him of Amelia's innocence, her kindness, and her words, "You can take my teddy, you look sad." That one sentence had shaken him more than all the advice he had ever received from adults. One Friday evening, David was supposed to attend a high-profile dinner with investors. It was the kind of event that once would have been unmissable for him. But that same evening, Emma had a small school performance. She was part of a play and had a few lines to say on stage. It wasn't a big event by most standards, but for her, it meant the world. His first instinct was to find a way to do both: attend the performance quickly and then rush to the dinner. But then he stopped himself. He remembered all the times he had told Emma, "I'll be there," only to never show up. He thought about the look on her face when she pretended it didn't matter. He couldn't let that happen again. So, for the first time in his career, he cancelled his appearance at an important investor dinner. His colleagues were shocked. His assistant even reminded him of the possible consequences. But David was calm. "Some things matter more," he said simply. That night, he sat in the school auditorium, surrounded by other parents, holding a small bouquet of flowers in his hands. When Emma stepped onto the stage, she glanced nervously at the crowd. The moment her eyes found him sitting there, smiling and clapping, her face lit up. She delivered her lines with confidence, her voice clear and bright. When the play ended, she ran to him, hugging him tightly. "You came, Daddy," she whispered. And in that moment, he knew he had made the right choice. That evening became a turning point. He realized that while his business could always wait for him, his daughter's childhood would not. Each day that passed was a day gone forever, and he didn't want to lose any more of them. Back at the office, his approach to leadership began to shift as well. Instead of pushing his employees to the edge with endless demands, he encouraged them to take breaks, spend time with their families, and pursue hobbies outside of work. At first, they thought it was temporary, a passing mood. But as weeks went by, they saw that he was serious. The company culture began to change. People looked happier, more creative, more committed. They weren't just working for a paycheck anymore, they were working in an environment that respected their lives beyond the office. One day, during a meeting, a young employee timidly approached him afterward. "Sir," she said, "thank you for giving me time off last week. I got to attend my son's birthday party for the first time in 3 years. I can't tell you how much that meant." David nodded, and as she walked away, he felt an unexpected lump in his throat. He realized that just as Amelia's kindness had changed his life, he now had the chance to change others' lives by giving them back the time and balance they had lost. Despite these positive changes, David still struggled privately with guilt. Every time he saw Emma, he thought of the years he had missed. He wondered if he could ever make up for them. But slowly, with each shared moment, an ice cream outing, a game of cards, a simple walk, he began to rebuild their bond. It wasn't about grand gestures, it was about being present. And Emma noticed. One evening, as they sat together watching a movie, she leaned against him and said, "I like it when you're here, Daddy. You don't always have to bring gifts. Just being here is enough." Those words melted the last layer of ice around his heart. The teddy bear remained a constant companion. Sometimes, when David sat alone late at night, he would hold it and think about Amelia. He hadn't seen her since that evening in the park, but she had given him something priceless, a second chance at life. He wondered if she ever thought about the sad man on the bench to whom she had given her toy. Perhaps she had forgotten. Perhaps for her, it was just a small act of kindness, nothing more. But for him, it had become the spark that lit a fire of change. One Sunday afternoon, as he sat with Emma in the same park, watching her sketch in her notebook, he couldn't help but remember Amelia. He looked around, half hoping to see her again, but she wasn't there. Still, he felt grateful. Sometimes strangers enter your life for only a moment, yet they leave an impact that lasts forever. It was around that time that David made a decision that surprised even himself. He wanted to create something meaningful beyond his company, something that would honor the lesson he had learned. He set up a foundation focused on children's well-being, providing spaces where kids could play, learn, and spend time with their families. He wanted parents who were caught in the same cycle he had been to realize the importance of balance. At the launch event, he spoke openly about his own mistakes, about the years he had lost, and about the little girl in the park who had reminded him of what really mattered. His story spread quickly. Newspapers that once praised him for his business success now wrote about his personal transformation. People admired his honesty, his willingness to admit that even those who seemed to have it all could feel empty. For the first time, the recognition he received felt genuine, not hollow. This time, people weren't admiring his wealth, they were admiring his humanity. At night, when everything was quiet, David often sat by the window holding the teddy bear. He would look out at the city, at the countless lights, and think about how many people out there might be feeling the same loneliness he once felt. He wished they, too, could have their own Amelia, someone who would remind them, in the simplest way, of what truly mattered. Though his journey was far from over, David felt a deep sense of peace he hadn't known in years. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of slowing down. He wasn't afraid of missing a deal or stepping back from the spotlight. He had found something far more valuable: connection, love, and the realization that life was not meant to be measured in contracts signed or profits earned, but in moments shared, in smiles, in laughter, and in the innocence of a child's kindness. As he sat in the park one evening with Emma by his side, he realized he had come full circle. He had walked into the park months ago as a lonely man, drowning in his own success, and had walked out carrying a teddy bear that would change his life. Now he returned as a father learning to love again, a leader learning to care again, and a man who finally understood that true wealth was never in his bank account, it was in his heart. The seasons changed, and with them, David's life continued to transform. The man who once measured his days in contracts and profits now measured them in smiles, conversations, and the quiet joy of being present. His mornings no longer began with endless phone calls but with breakfast shared with Emma whenever she stayed over. They would sit at the table, talking about simple things: her school projects, her favorite books, or the funny stories her friends told. For him, those conversations were worth more than any boardroom meeting he had ever attended. The teddy bear still sat in his home, a silent reminder of the day everything began to change. Sometimes Emma would pick it up, hold it, and ask again about Amelia. Each time, David told her the story with the same tenderness, because he wanted his daughter to know that kindness, no matter how small, had the power to save someone's heart. Emma grew fond of the teddy too. She began calling it Hope, saying it was the perfect name because it had brought hope back into their lives. David smiled at her choice. She was right. Hope had been there at the lowest point of his life, and it continued to guide him. At work, people noticed how different he had become. His once distant and strict personality had softened. He smiled more, listened more, and encouraged his employees to find balance in their lives. Some of them began bringing their children to the office occasionally, and instead of frowning, David welcomed it. He would bend down to greet the little ones, sometimes even giving them a piece of candy or asking about their favorite games. The man who had once lived behind walls of seriousness was learning how to connect again. The foundation he had started for children began to grow rapidly. Schools, parks, and communities welcomed his support. He visited some of these places personally, often sitting with children, listening to their dreams, and laughing at their jokes. Every time he saw their innocent smiles, he thought of Amelia and silently thanked her for showing him the way. He never found her again, but in a way, she was everywhere, present in every child's laughter, in every parent's relieved smile when they realized they didn't have to sacrifice love for work. Emma grew closer to him as well. She began inviting him to more of her school activities, proudly introducing him to her friends. For the first time in years, she didn't just see him as the busy man who was always rushing somewhere else. She saw him as her father, someone who cared, someone who showed up. Slowly, the wall between them crumbled, replaced by trust and warmth. One evening, after they had spent the whole day together baking cookies and watching movies, Emma hugged him tightly before bed and whispered, "I like the new you, Daddy." Tears filled his eyes, but they were tears of joy, not regret. He knew then that he was finally on the right path. One Sunday, while walking with Emma in the park, they sat on the same bench where he had first met Amelia. David looked at the empty playground and smiled. He told Emma, "This is where I met the little girl who gave me the teddy. Right here." Emma looked around, then at him, and said softly, "Maybe she was an angel." David chuckled, but deep down, he wondered if she was right. Maybe Amelia had been sent into his life at the exact moment he needed her most. As months passed, the story of the teddy bear became something David often shared at events, interviews, and speeches. He didn't talk about profits or strategies anymore. Instead, he talked about kindness, balance, and love. People listened more closely than ever before because his words came from experience, not from theory. He admitted his mistakes openly, telling others how he had chased success but lost himself, until a child's simple act of generosity brought him back. His honesty inspired many. Some CEOs and business leaders even reached out to him, telling him his story had made them rethink their own lives. But for David, the greatest reward wasn't the attention or praise. It was the quiet, everyday moments holding his daughter's hand as they crossed the street, laughing together over silly jokes, or simply sitting on the couch in comfortable silence. He had discovered a richness no money could ever buy. There were still days when work demanded a lot, when problems arose and decisions had to be made. But now, he approached them differently. He no longer saw work as the center of his life but as just one part of it. He knew when to step back, when to say no, and when to prioritize family over business. For a man who once thought success was everything, this new balance was the true definition of victory. One evening, after a long but fulfilling day, David sat by the window with the teddy bear in his lap. The city outside sparkled with lights, just as it had the night Amelia had found him on the bench. But now, those lights no longer made him feel lonely. They reminded him of life, of people living, laughing, and sharing moments together. He thought about Amelia again, wondering where she was, how she was doing, and if she ever realized how much she had changed his life. Even if she didn't, it didn't matter. He knew. And that was enough. As Emma grew older, she carried the lesson with her too. She often told her friends about Hope, the teddy that had once belonged to a little girl in the park. She explained how a simple act of sharing had brought her father back to her. The story spread among her classmates, inspiring even children to believe in kindness. David felt proud knowing the ripple effect of Amelia's gesture was continuing, reaching hearts far beyond that single moment in the park years later. When Emma prepared to leave for college, she hugged him tightly and said, "Daddy, don't forget Hope. Keep it close. It's part of our story." He promised he would. And he meant it. The teddy bear stayed on his desk, not as a decoration, but as a living reminder of everything he had learned. In the end, David realized that life had given him many treasures: money, success, recognition, but none of them had brought him peace. It was only when he received a simple teddy bear from a little girl that he truly began to understand what mattered. Love, compassion, time, and presence were the true treasures. They couldn't be bought, but they could be given, shared, and cherished. And so, whenever people asked him about the secret to his happiness, he would smile gently and say, "It all began when a little girl gave me her teddy because I looked sad. That teddy saved me." And every time he said it, his heart filled with gratitude, not just for Amelia, but for the second chance she had unknowingly given him.